Welcome everyone to the Transport Talk Show. We are here at the DHL Post Tower in Bonn, Germany from COP23, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change negotiations. So there are roughly 20,000 people wandering this premises, and we're trying to bring you the most up-to-date speakers and information related to transportation in particular. Of course, they're not here in DHL Tower, but they're wandering the COP23. So tonight, this is the 5th talk show, and every night we have a different theme, and tonight's theme is really celebrating where transportation and sustainable transportation in particular. We've had a series of really great speakers and some fantastic things that have happened over the weekend, including a thematic day dedicated all to transportation, which we're going to hear a little bit about from our first speaker. Before we do that, I want to give some special thanks, of course, to DHL for hosting us, as well as to PPMC. That's the Paris Process for Mobility and Climate. It's an initiative by both SLoCaT and Michelin's Moving On. And also take care of some housekeeping rules. If you're in the vicinity here, please silence your phone. And if you're listening to us out there in the ether, you are welcome to send in questions to #WeAreTransport. And we have a team here who is going to be able to send those questions to our panel tonight. We have 4 different speakers from the International Energy Agency, as well as the Prince of Wales Corporate Leaders Group and the Ministry of Transportation, which from Argentina, which is great. They'll be coming up next. But first and foremost, we have the Director General from the International Union of Railroads, better known as UIC here in the transport land, Jean-Pierre Loubinoux. And we're very fortunate to have you. I know you have a very packed schedule. This weekend, the UN UNFCCC has dedicated different days to different action areas, energy, forests, etc., and there was one dedicated to transportation. So maybe we'll get to hearing a little bit more about that, because you play a key role in all of that. But before we do, can you just tell us sort of who you are and what do you do here?
Thank you, with pleasure in a few minutes. Yes, so I'm the CEO of the UIC. UIC is the World House of Rail. So representing all the railway operators around the world, 100 countries. And of course, through this, we are in the center of mobility, because rail is a backbone of this new transportation mix. And I say that on purpose, because mobility is not only one mode, it's all modes together. And this is why I'm very happy not only to talk, actually, as the CEO of UIC, but as a member of SLoCaT as well. And we are transport, are we not? And we are all transport. We have all to work together, and this is how actually I'm trying to bring my added value through UIC and SLoCaT.
Excellent, and I'm actually going to ask you some more questions about UIC later, because I think rails is we call it the modal shift, right? So many people are moving to trains and rails for freight, for passengers, but let's talk a little bit more on that in a sec. Because first and foremost, we had this amazing day dedicated to transportation on Saturday, as one of the main action areas that the climate change action areas have dedicated to. Can you sort of talk us through what were highlights of that or key messages that you would want to bring forward?
Well, first, I'm very happy that we had this thematic on transport. You know, as UIC, we organized since COP15 the first train to Copenhagen. Then we had the train to Paris, COP21. Then I was on the train to Bonn last Sunday, and we really tried to drive rail and transport in the middle of the thematics. We all know that transportation is accountable for 25% of the CO2 emissions and so on, but we really need to have actually this focus on how all modes together, once again, can be a strong contributive to the SDGs. And one of the thematics was precisely SDG 11 and a few others, not only 11, but a few others. So SDGs, NDCs, how can transport actually bring this added value expected from all stakeholders, politicians, financials, private and public sector, to reduce the CO2, but that's mitigation, also to be more resilient, and that's adaptation.
Yeah, and SDG is Sustainable Development Goal 11, which is dedicated to cities and urban, and so on, livable cities. So excellent. And we were really, you mentioned about COP15, which was, the first train was in 2000
2009
Oh,
to
it really
Copenhagen.
was?
Yes,
Ah, it was. Okay, they've been
from
happening
Brussels to Copenhagen.
Okay,
Yeah.
and what those are sort of celebratory trains where people that are involved in the negotiations
That's right.
utilize trains to get to the COPs, and they
yeah,
sometimes they get quite festive.
Yes,
I must
it
say.
can. Yes, of course.
And they can. Okay, so from the thematic day that was dedicated to transportation, what were some of the key messages that came forward? You know, about we've gone a long way since 2009.
Well,
what is the focus of transportation?
First,
today?
I think that this word has come now as it was a little bit original when I first mentioned transportation mix. When I first mentioned that we have to work together and have a new philosophy, complementarity and not competition. And it seems now that it's shared by everyone. Everybody is really looking forward to this new paradigm of working together at the same time. And I think that this is one of the messages that came across. But there was other messages, like how can state and non-state actors work together? Some have a vision, others have actions. How can they combine this actually in the most efficient way? And there is another message which I think can be the thematic or can be the theme that appears as the most pragmatic way to go forward with this COP23. You know, COP21 was ambitions, COP22 was enablers, COP23 is measurements. How can we quantify, measure, bring some metrics actually to see the progress of things? It will not appear in one day. It will appear in a series of actions on a short or middle term, which was the theme of the 11th day on transport. And how can we now put on the table some quantification? Having said that, I'm very happy, and it will be the next speaker actually, to say how we work together with the International Energy Agency on this handbook, which quantifies and measures the efforts done by all the stakeholders, by all the actors, to really give evidence, give proof that a number of actions can really improve the situation.
That's a really good point. I think that the plans were laid out a long time ago, the objective to reduce emissions below 2 degrees or 1.5 ideally, et cetera, but now and implementation is scaling up, but we need evidence that this is working, what isn't working, et cetera. And so the idea of measurements, and of course it gets complicated, metrics, standardization of metrics, et cetera, is quite difficult, but that's the work to be done.
Yes.
Yeah.
All the more so that actually we know very well that to be more resilient, to go through more adaptation, we need more investments. Much more investment than what is planned in the next 10 to 20 years, maybe up to 5 times what is planned. And it is obvious that we need to measure the return on investment. And I would say that if there is one theme that I would like actually to push forward, we always think of return of investment like a financial return of investment, okay? But there is also, we know well, a social return of investment through less congestions, fewer accidents, more jobs, less time lost, okay, or wasted. But there is also a sustainable return of investment. And this is some new idea that I'm putting forward now as something that can be quantified. And when you look at society in general and all the stakeholders together, once again, let's think together, the sustainable return of investment added to the social return of investment can bring a much better financial return of investment.
Sure.
And this, in the end, can prove that all the savings done through a number of actions to optimize accessibility can actually be a virtuous and profitable investment.
Cycle, absolutely. And so and that's sort of where also the climate change and SDGs overlap, because the SDG 11 or 12 related to sustainable consumption production, gender equality, number 5, health, et cetera, all of these other
transport in
indicators,
all of them.
And there's transport related to all of them, and there's benefits related to all of them, so that's really good.
Yes.
And the collaboration is needed to prove that, to have evidence for that, et cetera.
I had the privilege and the pleasure actually to be part of the sustainable mobility from the UN, the report from the UN, as part of this high-level group of experts. And I remember very well the discussions about the SDG, and some of my colleagues said, well, there is no SDG on transport. And the answer is because transport is in all of them.
Is in all of them, absolutely. And there's a lot of when you go back to collaboration as well. So can you give some really good examples of where, for example, with UIC, maybe you had a commitment that came out a while ago.
Yes.
to reduce emissions, to increase efficiency, to do a modal
Yes,
shift.
yes.
Can you explain a little bit about that and how you are collaborating with other partners?
Yes, well, of course, the pledge that was signed by most of our members, actually, from China to United States to a number of other European stakeholders, to reduce by 50 to 60% CO2 emissions, same for energy, and to organize modal shift, is now put in place. We have identified with other partners more than 1,000 lines of actions for modal shift, which actually in the end is equivalent to close to $2 trillion worth of investments and savings. And this actually is showing that we have to go forward. But if there is one priority in this 21st century, first part of the 21st century is the cities. That was the theme of today, of the high-level group today. And I know other people will talk about it better than me, but the city is probably the place where the most efforts must be dedicated, because 2 billion people will be more on Earth will be urbanized in the next 5-10 years, which means that the congestion of city, the pollution of city, the efficiency of city is there to be reconsidered through a new transportation mix. And the management of interface of all these modes through a better organized railway station is fantastic. Is there. This is what I call the sustainable, connected, integrated chain of mobility.
And are you working on measurements for that sort of process when you do the modal shift within urban areas? What are the benefits to health and reduce pollution, etc.?
One simple measurement is how much time you spend from your high-speed train to your bike or your Uber or your taxi or your metro.
Excellent.
And time there is really worth. And the measurement of this time spent between modes, and the reduction of this time spent between modes actually is a very good indicator of progress.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, well, thank you so much. Great. There's a lot to celebrate with transportation. It's going so fast, no pun intended, that it's almost hard to keep track of all of the gains and new initiatives that are happening and new successes. So everyone's getting the same question, and I think I prepared you for this. So in one quick response, please provide an answer to what is a specific pragmatic transport action that can transform the sector right now?
One?
Just one.
A better management of interface between all modes.
Between all modes. Excellent. Yes. That would be, actually, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So please stay here for 1 second.
Okay.
We have a video that's going to be coming from, we've been going from views from the street, touring COP23, and we have asked people many questions about sustainable transportation, and we're going to hear from Francesca from Germany and Saad from Palestine.
So for me, sustainable transport is really a holistic concept. We should not only pay attention to the climate aspect, but there's so many side benefits from, for example, measures that increase the share of active travel, on human health, on even happiness. In my degree, I did a lot of happiness economics, and seeing how commuting is really some source of insatisfaction for many people, and with that respect, making it more pleasant, increasing the share of active travel to go to your workplace is a measure that has not only an impact on our climate and can make our cities greener and they all improve the air quality, but it also has repercussions on how people feel or how people can get in touch with one another. So I see that really as a very holistic concept.
In Palestine, as a country still under occupation, we're doing our best toward having our own state. Public transportation or sustainable public transportation is an important part of being independent and sustainable country. As Palestine ratified Paris Agreement last year, we hope and we're looking forward for the government support. So far, they're providing good gesture about this thing, and they're willing to provide more. Next year, we'll start providing, working on the Palestinian Peers initiative for promoting public transportation in Palestine, called the Sustainable Public Transportation Working Group in Palestine.
Great, thanks so much. So welcome back. That was, again, Francisco from Germany and Saad from Palestine. This is the Transport Talk Show from the DHL Post Tower, sponsored by PPMC, the Paris Process for Mobility and Climate. Jean-Pierre Loubinoux from the UIC, the Union International Union for Railways, will be coming back for the Q&A if you have questions for him. Our next guests, we're celebrating transport tonight, that's the theme. We have 3 delightful guests who are going to help us do this. Here is Jill Duggan. No, Duggan?
Duggan.
Yeah, Duggan. The Executive Director from the Prince of Wales Corporate Leaders Group. And Lucila Capelli from the Ministry of Transport from Argentina. I don't pretend to be able to do that.
No,
the name
it's
stuff.
great.
Yeah, it's good, right? And then Pierpaolo.
Cazzola.
Thank you so much, from the International Energy Agency. So we'll start at the end and we'll come back this way. First of all, of course, why are you here? 20,000 people, what brings you here?
Okay, I think I'm here basically to let these 20,000 people know about what we've been doing on sustainable transportation and promote the work of the agency in this area. The IEA has been a long time, I would say, in this type of framework. It doesn't only work on transport, it works across the whole energy system. My angle is to try to bring the transport vision to this community. We actually have been pretty active this year. We've been publishing several reports covering fuel efficiency, covering trucks, covering electric mobility, which is something we do regularly by now. And also, I think, covering rail, as was mentioned right now by Jean-Pierre. But I think the most important output has been an analysis which is called Energy Technology Perspectives 2017, which has been focused in particular at scenarios that would enable not only transportation, but the whole energy system to meet the target of the Paris Agreement to limit the growth in carbon emissions. In the average global temperature increase well below, maintaining it well below 2 degrees. So we have a scenario which is called beyond 2 degrees, and which actually hits a 50% probability to reach 1.75 degrees, and comes with strong messages about the need to decarbonize the energy system by 2060, and as part of that to have very strong emission reductions in transportation. So the report outlines what is actually necessary to achieve that, looking at different modes, and I'm sure we'll have a chance later to dive into part of that.
Absolutely, great. So yeah, your IEA is known and very much depended on for a lot of resources. You're a transport and energy analyst there. You are relied on from the measurement aspect in many regards by a lot of entities to provide the backbone of people's work.
Yeah, the IEA is well known for a strong statistical capacity. So the IEA publishes every year statistics on the evolution of CO2 emissions across the whole energy system, including in transport, including in all transport modes, and also has significant assets to assess how these are going to develop in the future, and again with a strong quantitative angle.
But I understand, though, being that tonight's theme is celebrating transportation, you have some initiatives that you're engaged in that you are launching or have previously launched or scaling up, come forward on the Clean Energy Ministerial next year, et cetera, around electric mobility. Maybe you can explain a little bit more about those.
Indeed, there's one of the outcomes of our analytical reports is that inevitably electrification of transportation will play a significant role in achieving the targets of the B2ES or the Paris Agreement. And as part of, given this relevance, we've been already working since now 7 years on something called Electric Vehicle Initiative, which is an initiative that has been launched under the Clean Energy Ministerial, so developed under the Clean Energy Ministerial, and is involving, I would say, the most dynamic markets in terms of uptake of electric mobility, from China to countries in Europe such as France, UK, Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, and countries in North America, including the United States, Canada, and Mexico.
Is there anywhere it's not? Just by the way, you listed almost everywhere. I mean,
well, that's good news in a way. So there's a good coverage. No, there's places where we're not yet.
Okay,
like
all right.
ASEAN, for instance,
Yeah,
or
okay.
Indonesia, or
Okay.
Africa, Argentina. Yeah.
All right.
I'm actually trying to convince Argentina
There's
to
gonna-
join.
Maybe some collaboration can happen here. Okay.
And there's a new part of the initiative which I think it's very interesting. So the initiative has been successful to make sure that there's a good communication between governments committed to support the transition to electric mobility. And now we are moving into trying to build up something similar for cities. So there's an initiative, there's been a campaign in June called EV 30 at 30 that stated a target for EVI to reach 30% market share by 2030 for electric mobility. And one of the implementing actions under that target is actually to mobilize development, so deployment of electric vehicles in cities, which is clearly one of the areas where you have the strongest benefits, and where today you also have a significant part of the uptake.
Right.
And so the concept is enabling this network of cities to talk to each other, learn from each other, understand which kind of policies have been deployed, why, and whether they worked or not, in order to make sure that the following actions is, let's say, informed by the best practices that have already been happening. There's also an industry cooperation element in that. So some cities have been trying to partner in PPPs with industry to enable the transition to electric mobility. Public-private partnership, yes, with industry to enable the transition to electric mobility. We think that's important, and so this communication between different type of actors, this is also something you touched upon before.
Yeah.
It's an important element of this initiative.
Excellent, excellent. And so there's so much there to unpack. I mean, including there's so much there, and there's a lot of potential. And we're going to go back to that, including your last question about what would you do if you could do one thing. And I have a feeling it's going to be around electric mobility, but let's not make assumptions here. And we'll have time to discuss amongst ourselves. But that was an excellent introduction as to what are the key things you're celebrating and doing here in COP23. All right, so Lucila, so you work in the Ministry of Transport.
Yes.
You're an advisor.
Yes.
Okay.
Good.
And can you tell us what you're doing here first, briefly?
Yes, we came here to Bonn to present the Transportation Action Plan of Argentina. So we are very glad because in the last 2 years we were doing an integral revision of our measures that were part of the NDC. And Argentina has now a free action plan, forest, energy and transportation. And so we are here to share our plan to the community.
Okay, great. And so the National Determined Contribution, the NDC, is something you've been pretty deeply involved in,
Yes.
the action plan for achieving this. And you're focused specifically on transportation. This is a transport show. Maybe you can go into more detail as to what that entailed.
Of course, we changed government in 2015. So the new president created the Cabinet of Climate Change in 2016, and the cabinet there are many tables and technical groups doing integral revision of all the measures that were part of our contribution. And in 2016 in Marrakesh, Argentina increased his NDC. And now we have an action plan, as I said before. In the transport sector, we used to have 2 measures, and now we have 8 in total. We have 4 for urban mobility. That includes the railway trains for the city. As my colleagues said before, railways are the backbone of the transport sector in cities as big as Buenos Aires, for example, where we have 15 million persons traveling every day. The second measure of urban transport is regarding low emission strategies, and there we are having a free pilot plan for electric mobility next year with buses, with light heavy vehicles, and with taxis. Also, we are promoting non-motorized transport like bikes and walking. There it was very difficult to measure the impact of bicycles and walking in the reduction of emissions. Also, we face a methodological problems.
Methodologically, yeah.
Methodological problems.
Yeah.
And we have another measure that is the promotion of electric and hybrid buses. And also we were working in the intercity transport because we are a huge country, very big, and distances between cities are maybe distances between countries in Europe. So the size of Argentina is really different from European countries. We were doing mitigation programs for the air sector and also for the rails, for the interurban rails. And at last, but not least, is the freight sector. As we are, we produce grains and we export grains all over the world, but the places where we produce the grains are very far from our ports. So distances are many times more than 1,000 kilometers. So the biggest emission in Argentina is because of trucks. The 60% of the emissions are the freight sector. So we are focused on the mitigation in that sector by two ways. Improving the efficiency of these trucks, that is they transport the 95% of our goods, and also improvement of the rails in order to start transporting more and more goods for 2030.
That's that modal shift that
yes,
you're talking
the modal
about, from
shift.
trucks to rails, and then even once that rails be more efficient, which is, UIC, they're quite humble actually. They
yes,
have
it's totally
90% of all of the global rails are within that association, and they have made a global commitment to increase efficiency at something like 75% by 2050. Or I hope I'm getting that right, but yeah, it's a fantastic initiative, and so this is excellent to hear the details of sort of and what it really takes to make an NDC transport specific, because we've heard that there's there's a lot of ambition but not a lot of detail about transport goals in NDCs, and so it's you really give an excellent example of something that's quite successful. I understand that you've been working with other ministries on this, and that's, I don't think we have time to go into details because I'm getting cues here, but if you can nod that you have, maybe you can list just 2 other cabinets or ministries?
No, we were working in the cabinet, especially with energy, because we consume a lot of energy, and with environment.
And environment.
Also with industry and production.
Okay.
To
anything with agriculture, land use?
No, a lot with agriculture.
Don't say that because we want to hear yes. So don't. Okay,
Sorry.
That's the future. You
Okay,
will be.
we will
You're going to go home and
next
you're going to
next year in Poland.
next year you're going to go talk to them and say, are we doing it right? Can we do anything better?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Okay, all right, excellent. And think about what is that one thing, and we're going to ask that at the end. Jill, thanks for your patience. Okay. Thanks for letting me mispronounce your last name like 3 times.
It happens all the time.
Yeah, mine as well. Okay, so you're the executive director of the Corporate Leaders Group Prince of Wales Foundation. I'm not quite sure.
Let me just tell you a little bit about it.
Tell me about that. Who are you and what are you doing here, and how do I say this?
The Prince of Wales Corporate Leaders Group was set up 12 years ago, and it's a small elite group of progressive companies who want to see action accelerating on climate change.
Excellent.
And it's a cross-sectoral group, so they don't lobby for any particular self-advantage. We keep that's very important to us, that it's a cross-sectoral group. And they demonstrate what needs to happen and what is possible by we produce a series of business conversations looking at what have our companies learned as they've tried to tackle some of these issues, what are their policy asks for them. We would be here anyway, but we happen to have just produced a report on road transport called Electric Avenue, of course, which looks at what's possible, what companies are doing, and what more needs to be done. And it's the start of these things we can build on in the future. But it was quite an important moment.
And is it from the corporate perspective of what they need or what they want to see, or what is the specific angle there? That report?
For all of these business conversations, it's very much about this is what we've done, and actually these are the things that would make it easier for us, or these are the things that have actually stopped us from doing things. And so it's really looking at, I think there's a virtuous circle policymakers make policy. Companies respond to that. Companies now, I think, increasingly use their creativity to go further, and then policymakers need to catch up. And I'm also very aware that we are a small group, the corporate leaders group, but I've worked in business as well. Business look to business to lead, and they understand, why are they doing that? What's in it for them? And it's much more interesting for other businesses to learn from business.
And it's competitiveness. I mean, there are some, of course we all hear about, Unilever's been out in the front for sustainability for a very long time. They had a market edge, edge in the market because of it, and others are sort of seeing that,
And it's also just alerting them to some of these issues. When when you're in business and you're focused on producing your next whatever or winning your next job, or you don't always recognize the policy landscape in which you're working, however much they should do. But to see somebody in their sector or one of their customers going out and doing something that makes them ask, why are they doing it? What should I be doing here?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, did you say it's a small group right now?
No, it's always been a small group, and it's deliberately a small group. So we keep the numbers to around 25 cross-sector, because we also want them to learn from each other. So it's very much a club of leaders.
And the Electric Avenue
Yes.
report. I like the so what was sort of the big takeaway message from it that you would want to share?
Well, I think that there's a few, and I'm sure they come up all over the place. We're at a kind of tipping point at the moment. We've been talking about the electrification, particularly of road transport, for a long time, and now we're at this point where it's starting to take off. I think 2 years ago, 500,000 cars, electric cars, were sold globally. I think last year it was 1 million. Or this year, so it's actually increasing very quickly. And we're seeing, the development of the technologies where the range that these cars can do is increasing. The other things that we're seeing, obviously, is the digital technology is increased the use of sharing services, so you don't need to own your vehicle, and you can start to combine sharing services with electrification. There's a lot of opportunities there. And then we're looking towards autonomous vehicles as well, which many think that will happen in the 2020s. So that creates a lot of opportunities. It creates opportunities for businesses because it's going to change the nature of business, but it also creates a lot of opportunities to tackle climate change, air quality, accessibility, isolation. All sorts of things can come out of this.
Absolutely. And I think with we've been dealing with this with the corporate, with the climate conundrum for a while, is that, as you mentioned, policy drove things for a while, but then in many areas, the companies were basically stepping ahead of policy and nudging the policy, nudging governments to say, look, we're ready, we're eager, we're going to act whether or not you do or don't, and that can actually drive policy, it can drive consumers, it can shape things. We were talking to DHL recently, they're pledging to be decarbonized by 2050. There's so many examples of them pushing the market ahead of, not ahead of Argentina, but ahead of ahead of some other governments, which we won't,
And I think what can happen, what we've seen in energy, for example, is the fall in the price of offshore wind and solar.
Yes.
Is way beyond what people have predicted in this timescale. So we don't know what will happen now. We know there are still obstacles in the way, but
excellent.
The opportunities are very great.
Very great. Okay. Before we bring back up Jean-Pierre, we're going to ask that one question of each of you. We'll start, since you just spoke, you have a moment to think. We'll go back and come this way, and then we'll have questions from Twitter. Hashtag we are transport. Hashtag we are transport. If you have any questions, so as succinctly as possible. You can't answer with "there is no silver bullet." We all know that. But what is one thing, one practical, pragmatic action that the transport sector could take to transform itself or be transformed right now?
So given that I agreed we are on the verge of a big change in transportation, and that involves electric mobility, but not only, goes beyond that, I would say, if you're a government, join the Electric Vehicle Initiative, and if you're a city, join the Pilot City program.
There you go. Yeah, good pitch. All right, Lucila.
I think that national and local level have to work together in the action plans for the implementation of NDCs and Sustainable Development Goals.
Excellent. Yes, very good. Jill?
I think strong, ambitious targets can really drive creativity and innovation, and I would like to see a single European target for getting rid of fossil fuel cars, as opposed to a member state by member state.
Very good, very good. That would be nice, wouldn't it? Okay, great. Thank you so much. So Jean-Pierre is going to come up here, and we're going to, we can take a couple minutes to see if there's any comments you have about each other's. Could you still have your mic on? Any other comments you wanted to say about each other's? Like I think it was really nice that we had an example of all of the amazing messages that came out of the thematic day from yourself, but the modal shift in particular to rail, electric mobility, and the measurements. You spoke about measurements, the measurements that are needed, basically, that IEA graciously shares with the world, and an annual report, but also their initiatives, Electric Vehicles Initiative, EVI, as well as EV 30 by 30, lots going on there. Governments that are really ambitious and collaborative in their approach with NDCs, which is fantastic, and the corporate world, which is on deck and scaling up. So a lot was discussed here. Before we go to some questions from the audience, do you want to comment on each other's anything?
I think it's good to see the complementarity of the different individuals. The angle from the individual government rather than corporate, but also I would say like the more avoid and shift type of message that comes with the rail angle and the electrification, which is admittedly more a road type of angle at this point, but has already been a case in rail for a longer time, and now it's becoming a road type of subject.
Yeah, really matured. Everyone's adopted this avoid.
Very good.
Yeah, although we need to enable, I think, in front of that we've been talking.
Enabling, yes. I think we are here, state and non-state actors, various stakeholders, but I think that we share the same philosophy, that it's all about now mobility, it's all about accessibility, and it's all about doing it together.
Yeah. And we all have learned we can't do this alone. We really need companies, we need governments, we need the experts, the arrogance of past generations is over, I think.
And the coherent strategy, I think, as we've all kind of discussed, it needs to be that big picture needs to be looked at so that we don't go down blind alleys.
Yeah, we don't have time for mistakes. We don't have time to say, oh, let's just experiment with this for a few years. All right, so we do have a question from Twitter. What is the expert opinion on what will happen after the death of diesel in Germany, specifically? Two kind of follow-up angles. Will diesel cars be retired soon in a few years or be driven for decades? Will they then be, I did not plant this question, I swear. Will they be then trashed or recycled or exported to third world or developing states or other nations?
Sounds familiar.
Good question.
This came from Twitter, and maybe it's directed towards the two that we're talking about, electric mobility.
I think actually some of the biggest action on air quality is in developing countries. China and India have got specific problems with air quality. I think, and they've also got some of the most ambitious targets for getting rid of fossil fuels, at least new cars. So I hope that what happens is that diesel cars are retired reasonably quickly because they are damaging our air quality. I think around 5 million people die prematurely each year because of air quality. And I really hope that they're not just, I hope the parts are recycled, but they're not recycled into other diesel cars.
In other countries,
In other countries.
Yeah.
We will not accept them.
What's that?
Argentina will not accept.
Not accept them. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There is some, okay, I've got my views, but yes?
I think that it's good news if we end up having polluting cars which stop circulating in cities. So transitioning is definitely something that, one of the key reasons why I think we are here advocating for similar things in that respect is that we see the benefits, and if diesel cars are amongst the polluting and basically having negative impacts on well-being in cities, I think transitioning, but not only in cities, if they are responsible also for climate change, I think transitioning makes a lot of sense. Undoubtedly, there is an effect related with the cars which are already on the road. I think some good news exists there, and we had a chance to talk about this recently. It's in cities that already have announced bans. You do see, for instance, an impact on the residual values of vehicles that are currently on the road and have I would say, kind of obsolete technologies, and so lead to fairly high pollution. So you end up having an impact which is influencing the way consumers react. And in my opinion, it's very important to mobilize this change. So since there's a clear vision to make mobility in an urban environment electric, the owners of diesel vehicles see, or polluting old vehicles, see the value of their vehicles falling. Clearly, I think this creates some interest about what's the alternative to that, what's new, what's not going to lose that value, and I think mobilizes, so creates quite a virtuous dynamic to mobilize the transition towards better alternatives.
Yes.
Well, there is an English saying that comes to mind, which is, don't kill your chicken before they hatch eggs. And I think a smooth transition is probably better than a tough disruption. And before you kill the diesel too quickly, it has to come one day. Let's make sure that we have actually good electric cars with sustainable, recyclable batteries with long life. And you have actually to make this transition go in parallel and not just precipitate one and just wait for the other.
Yeah. And there's probably things to encourage that transition to go faster as well, from the consumer angle as well, dealing with these cars and the transition as well. I don't think there are any other questions from the audience, so, and we're actually out of time since we had such a delightful conversation. I want to thank all of my guests. It was really lovely to have such diverse speakers and celebrating transportation after our thematic day on Saturday, which was well attended, and we brought Transportation Day and Thematic Day together for the first time this year for the Action Day, so it was really a great weekend. We have 3 more of these, if you don't mind waiting. I'll just explain them. I think they are urban mobility is tomorrow, and then the next one is on commitments and progress, and then Thursday night we do the future of transport, so the big vision going forward. So lots of really great speakers coming up. Thank you all so much, and remember, questions can be sent into #WeAreTransport. Thanks PPMC, thanks DHL, thanks everyone. Have a good one from Bonn. Bye.